Please keep standing for the reading of the gospel. We're reading today from Matthew 13, 10 through 17. Then the disciples came and asked him, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" He answered, "To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. For those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. The reason I speak to them in parables is that seeing they do not perceive, and hearing they do not listen, nor do they understand. With them indeed is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah that says, you will indeed listen, but never understand, and you will indeed look, but never perceive. For this people's hearts have grown dull, and their ears are hard of hearing, and they have shut their eyes, and they might not look with their eyes, or hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and turn, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. Truly, I tell you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you did see, but do not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it." The word of God for the people of God.
I love a good story. I love books. In fact, I have too many of them. I love TV shows and movies. I love comic books. I even love Instagram stories and Snapchat stories. I love a good story. Always have. The problem is, though, is that I currently have too many of them. I don't know. I have a story on Amazon. I have a story that I'm watching on Netflix, on Apple. Well, actually, there's like 2 on Apple TV. But I love a good story, and really, we all do, because we are a collection of our stories, a collection of the events and things that have happened to us, the triumphs we have encountered, the challenges we have faced, the times that we have succeeded, the times that we have failed. We are a collection of our stories, and we love good stories, stories that reveal something about who we are, stories that may take us to someplace far, far away, stories that make us feel something. And I love pretty much all stories except for scary ones. I don't understand the people who go to a movie theater, pay $12 to $15 to go sit in a room for 2 hours just to be scared. I don't get it. But other than that, I love a good story. The problem is I can't tell one to save my life. It's bad. It is truly terrible. And if you've had to listen to one of my stories thus far, this is my opportunity to share my sincere condolences and apologies. And for those of you who have not had to listen to a story of mine yet, consider yourself warned. It's really very bad. I have this habit of starting in the middle of the story and giving you no context for what's actually going on. See, what happens is I start telling the story inside of my own head, and then about halfway through I decide, I should verbalize this, and I assume that you've been in my head with me for the past 10 minutes, which of course you have not been in, you don't want to be. But I cannot tell a story to save my life. I forget details, I start in the middle of stuff, it's really quite painful. I can preach though, at least I like to think that I can. And many people will say that preaching is just a kind of storytelling, but it's different. Because this story matters. This gospel story matters. The parables that Jesus teaches us matters. The story of Moses and Abraham, they matter. My story? Not so much. Honestly, nobody cares about the time I met Bobby Plager. Nobody cares about the time I walked into a room and this guy came up to me who I didn't know and said, "Hey, have you met Bobby Plager?" And I said, "Of course not, I've not met Bobby Plager." And so he comes up to me and he says, "Hey, Bobby, come here." So Bobby comes up, he stands up, he walks over to me, and I extend my hand, and I'm just shaking like a tree. And I say, "It's an honor, sir." And he says, "Yeah, okay, kid," and he walks away. No one cares about that story. But this story matters. It's important. It's something that we value. It's something that we use to base our lives upon. This story deserves our care, our accuracy. But why does God teach us in story? We see time and time again that God uses the story to teach us something about ourselves and about how God wants us to live and move in this world. We see it from the very beginning, the stories of Eden. We see it in the story of Noah. And Jesus himself, when he comes to live and walk among us, he himself teaches in stories and in parables. But why the story? In the 14th chapter of Matthew that was read for us this morning, one of Jesus' disciples comes and says, "Hey, why do you teach in parables?" And Jesus gives a very direct, if not honestly brash response. The people are dense. They don't get it. Some people with an absence of tact, such as myself, might even say that we're stupid. We don't get it. The problem is that it's one thing to know the law. It's an entirely different thing to actually follow it. It's an easy thing to learn and memorize the 10 Commandments so you can recite them whenever you so desire. I can't. My memory doesn't work like that. I know what they say, but I can't recite them. It's a whole nother thing to then actually go and live that out. It's easy to know the law. It's a lot harder to actually follow it. I mean, we know what that's like. To come to church on Sunday morning, to sing the hymns, to remind ourselves of what God calls us to do, and to be joyful and happy Christians, and then to go to work on Monday and to go to the rest of our lives throughout the week, and it all just kind of falls apart. We know what it's like to talk the talk and then to fail to walk the walk. It's easy to know the law. It's a heck of a lot harder to actually do it. And we see this time and time again throughout Jesus' stories and throughout Jesus' ministry. I mean, in my favorite parable of the Good Samaritan, what happens? We have this guy, and he comes to say and says, "Hey, Jesus, how do I inherit eternal life?" And what does Jesus say? What does the law say? And the man recites the law perfectly, to love the Lord your God and to love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, "All right, cool, go do it. You know the law." But it doesn't click. He doesn't understand, and so he has to ask, okay, but who is my neighbor? We see this time and time again when the people struggle. We are told plainly and clearly that we are to love our neighbor. We are told plainly and clearly that we are to love our God. But we have failed to hear them. We have failed to see them. Our hearts have turned cold. We just don't get it. We have become dense. But what really gets me in this passage is that Jesus says that these people, they want to hear, they want to see, they want to feel, but they don't. And I struggle with that. What does it mean that they truly want to hear, but they just can't? I think really there are 2, maybe 3 possibilities here. One, there are times in which we can honestly plead ignorance. There are times when we simply do not know what to do. But sometimes we know exactly what we see, we know exactly what we hear, we know exactly what we feel, but we don't like it. And so we pretend like we didn't hear it, see it, or feel it at all. I suffer from acute selective hearing loss. It's a real diagnosis, I promise. I have a piece of paper and everything. And it's really quite funny, actually. Because someone will come up to me, and I'm going to have this conversation tonight. In fact, I had it this morning. "Wesley, don't forget to take the garbage out to the curb. It's garbage day." But I didn't hear it. Because I don't want to take out the garbage. So I didn't hear it. I just pretend like I didn't hear it. It's a lot easier to do it that way. Sometimes, though, it's, "Wesley, you really don't need to hold on to that grudge." But here's the thing. I like that grudge. So I'm going to pretend like I didn't hear it. Sometimes maybe it's, Black Lives Matter and critical race theory. But then again, that makes me uncomfortable because I don't want to think about how our society continues to perpetuate those problems. So I pretend like I didn't hear it. Or maybe it's Me Too and issues of sexism and sexual assault and sexual abuse in this country and in our world. But again, I don't want to listen to that because that makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to think about how our society perpetuates those things. So I pretend like I didn't hear it, like it doesn't exist. Sometimes we know exactly what we see and what we hear. But we don't like it because it challenges us. It goes against our worldview, the things that we have seen, the things that we have experienced, and it makes us uncomfortable. I mean, how many times did the apostles, did people that Jesus encountered respond poorly to the parables and to the good news? They heard it. They saw it. They felt it. But they chose not to recognize it because it's not what they wanted to hear. The reality is that when we truly listen to others, it forces us to hear ourselves and to hear others in a new way. When we truly see others, it forces us to see others and to see ourselves in a new way. And that's a challenge. And when we truly hear Jesus' stories, we see that the people that we often have contempt for are beloved children of God. We see our own jealousy and greed when others receive grace that we don't think they deserve. We see God's definition of fair in contrast with our own. We see we see our own religious pride and contempt for those sinners over there. And we see that God sides consistently with the least, the last, and the lost. And my friends, that's not always good news for the first. It's not always good news for the rich and the powerful and the found. So we choose not to hear. We choose not to see. We choose to allow our hearts to turn cold because loving God and loving neighbor is hard. But that's why these stories are so important for us. And that these stories of Jesus shares with us are truly amazing, and they're ones that we ought to take great care with, ones that we must share with the world around us, and ones that we must let challenge us. Because Jesus didn't tell these stories just because they were good stories, but because Jesus wants us to live them out in our lives. And what makes the parables of Eden and Noah, or even the parables of Jesus, so powerful is that we can see ourselves as a part of the story. When we read the parable of the Good Samaritan, we can see ourselves sometimes as the robbers. We can see sometimes ourselves as the ones who walk by on the other side. We can see ourselves, we hope to see ourselves as the Good Samaritan, but sometimes we also see ourselves as the man in the ditch. When we read the story of the two sons, sometimes we're the lost who has been found, but sometimes we're the one who stayed and is jealous. We can see ourselves in these stories, and just because we don't understand or comprehend someone else's story, or it's contrary to our experience, or we're just unwilling to hear it, or even if they're just a bad storyteller, that does not mean that their story is worthless. It doesn't mean that their story has no value. The parables for us are to be a model. They show us how to hear and how to see and how to feel with others, how to live in the way that God calls us to. These stories, they help prepare us for the real world. How to care for those who are beaten and left for dead by society. How to celebrate finding what is lost and checking our own ego in the process. How to have faith in the hardest of moments. How to spread the seeds of faith and how to receive them. How to love God and neighbor as ourselves. These stories are an example for us because we know the law. We know what we're supposed to do, but it can be so challenging to live it out. But my friends, I want to make sure that I say something here. That your story is just as important. By no means is this supposed to be a situation in which someone else's story is more important than your own, or some stories are more important than other people's. Rather, it's that all of our stories matter. And the things that you have experienced, the challenges you have faced, the triumphs that you have achieved, they matter. And they deserve to be told and to be heard. Because you matter. What's at stake here is the fact that we need to, instead of shooting down someone else's story because we don't agree with it, or trying to poke holes in someone else's story because we find it offensive, instead of doing those sorts of things, we need to listen to one another. I mean, what is our main problem in our society these days? The fact that we can't have a conversation with one another, to listen to other people, to hear other people, to feel with other people. Imagine how much better our world could be if we could take the time to listen, to hear, to see, and to share the stories of our own. That's how we grow. That's how we live into this thing that God calls us to. And so, my friends, open your eyes, unclog your ears, soften your heart, listen and look for the stories of those around you. And don't be afraid to tell your own story as well, even if they won't know who Bobby Plager is.